Hello guys, once again it's Matt, and today we have another video. Let's thank our members first. Overlanding 11B, Cots, and Crazy Bull. Thank you for being the full crew members. Thank you all the Fox Band members and all the Fish Band members, and let's get into it. Make sure to subscribe as well. So today we are finally talking with about the SU-24, the Fencer, called the Fencer, right, from NATO. It kind of doesn't have a Russian name, but still. I'm sure that pilots have a nickname for it, but I couldn't find that if he had it or not. But still, we are diving down the Sukhoi Su-24, an aircraft that I love and I really enjoy. And out of the three, the trifecta of the frontline low-altitude interdictor bomber aircraft, it's the final one that we are going to talk about, and hopefully we see it in game together with the other two, the F-111 and the Tornado. So in the 60s and especially in the 70s, but these started in the 60s, this idea of long-range strategic bombers were kind of becoming a little bit obsolete, especially with the more modern ICBMs being developed. So the idea behind flying massive uh, amounts of strategic bombers into the war, it was, if World War III started, would be just ineffective. So they started doing these type of ideas of having low altitudes and very fast aircraft to deploy nuclear bombs and also other things. They're kind of multi-role mission. They're very reliable on that. Every single one of them. So the F-111, the Tornado, and the Su-24. So yeah, but yeah, let's start with the Sukhoi 24. What is it? Okay, so the code name, as I said, is Fencer. It is a supersonic all-weather attack aircraft made in the Soviet Union by the Sukhoi OKB, I think it's what it was called, which is the a design bureau. Of course, they didn't have companies; they had design bureau, so it was basically a development research facility. It has variable sweep wings, two engines. It is biplaced side by side, just like the other two. I know the Tornado is intending, right? But still, first in the USSR to carry an integrated digital nav and attack systems, so pretty modern. And it is basically a frontline bomber. It's the evolution of the IL-28. Basically, it's an evolution from the frontline bomber capabilities. But obviously, because it is the evolution, they had different ideas behind it. So it was a low altitude interdictor, very fast, similar to the F-111 and the Tornado in mission type. And it basically can do many types of missions. The history behind it, basically, it was the beginning in the early 60s. So the beginning of the Su-24 starts with the acceptance of the Su-7 in service, the Su-7B, which was the basically the attacker version or the frontline version in the early 60s in 1961. With the idea behind that, Sukhoi would develop an all-weather version of that aircraft. So the Soviet government already knew that the Su-7B was kind of limited in some aspects, and they had this idea of having an all-weather kind of capability of ground attack, in mind. For the idea behind that as well, having a precision airstrikes and stuff like that. And yeah, with the preliminary investigations with the S-28 aircraft and the S-32 aircraft, obviously they were being developed, and obviously they were developing the Su-7 to become the Su-17 as well. It was revealed that the Su-7 design was too small to contain all the necessary avionics and systems for such a mission, so the all-weather capable, and in the Leninets Design Bureau, or the OKB 794, they started developing an advanced nav and attack system codenamed Puma. So basically how it worked in the Soviet Union, obviously you had many design bureaus, and they were just designing stuff, and once they have a kind of an integrated system, once they can have an idea and try to put it in another system on another aircraft, they normally did. So there's not much competition between those bureaus. Obviously there were competitions between aircraft itself to see what aircraft would be the better, for example. But normally it would just be like the better of the better, and whatever, you know. And then if a system for a certain aircraft or an engine or something like that would be better for another aircraft, they would just pick it up and put it in that aircraft, you know. So yeah, but this attack system, this Puma attack system, was the main thing about this new aircraft. So the idea was to have a more developed Su-7 with this system, but with this system, the Su-7 kind of design was too old and was not really capable of that. And yeah, but basically it was the same, around the same era and the same year. Basically, the Puma was starting to be developed in the same year that the TFX program started in the USA, so resulting in the Aardvark. So yeah, so it was very parallel to the F-111, you know. In 1962 and 1963, initially Sukhoi tried a delta wing design instead of a swing wing, so they had this idea of having the delta wing and using the R-21 turbojet. Was basically a very old engine for now, but still it was a very advanced engine for the time. But after the mock-up was built and inspected, it was cancelled due to the lack of progress in the development of the Puma hardware. So it was taking a little bit too much time, and not too much time, but the designs were not going to feed itself. You know, it was this prototype was called, or this mock-up was called the S6. Okay, in 1964, Sukhoi started the S-58M program, the S-58 prototype. It is called like this because it was basically a Su-15. So the S-58 was the prototype of the Su-15, and the S-58M would be this basis for the new aircraft. You know, it was basically a modification for the Su-15, as I said. So delta wing still, while the VVS requirements were being calling for a low altitude strike fighter with short takeoff and landing capability. So they needed an aircraft that didn't need too much runway, and also being able to traverse in the enemy territory at very low altitudes and at supersonic regime. So that would basically means that that this was the idea behind the whole project, you know, low altitude and very fast. And they decided to use for this project the R27, which was the initial engine for the MiG-23. So yeah, it's a very alright engine for use. And but the idea behind the short takeoff with the delta wing was to use 4 RD-36, 35 engines to do these short takeoffs. So basically, it would make it very similar to the Yak-38 in that aspect, you know, or the F-35. You would have these 4 engines on the front of the aircraft to make it kind of impulse the aircraft a little bit upwards and make it have a shorter takeoff. With the two, crews side by side, you know. So it is a very interesting design, and the first prototype of the Su-15 was converted with that. It used the Orion radar system, and it was converted being the S-58VD. Being a flying laboratory from 1966 to 1969. So basically this was the initial idea, to see if using a delta wing design, because it was a better wing design than all the other ones that they had, but obviously using this engine to do a short takeoff, because delta wings have a problem with that, with long distances in taking off, you know. But in 1965 it was officially sanctioned under the name T6. You know, the first prototype was completed in 1965-7, I mean, and with the first flight in July of that year with the Commander Vladimir Ilyushin, which is the son of the great Sergei Ilyushin from the Ilyushin Bureau. So pretty cool. And many people say that, oh, it's a competitor son's bureau, and he's flying the aircraft from Sukhoi. Oh my god, no, it doesn't work like that, okay? It's a completely different society, so this type of thing doesn't, like, it's not even a thought on them. It's a different society, of course. So yeah, the first flights were done without the 4 lift engines to see if the aircraft itself would fit. So it would, it's the 2-seater delta wing with the long takeoff, with the four lift engines installed in October 1967. So they did these tests with the lift engines and without the lift engines to see how it would compare and stuff like that. And at the same time, the engines were changed from the R27 engine to the Luca, or called normally the Saturn AL21, which was the same engine as in the Su-17, a very, very strong engine and very good. Obviously, it had two of them, so even stronger, right? With the tests done, completed, it was concluded that even though the short takeoff and landing was achieved with this four lift engine kind of situation happening, the performance in flight was significantly lost, especially in the flight distance that the aircraft could do, because due to the extra engines that were there, it had extra weight, obviously, and the engines were occupying a space that would normally be used for fuel. So it would have a very short range compared to the non 4-6 engine version. So yeah, also it made it so that it lost some of the fuselage hard points as well because of the engine, so it would be a problem. It was too problematic. I mean, they had to give too much just to have these engines, so we would not make it very suitable. And it also had problems with instability during the transitional phase from the short takeoff mode to the conventional flight. So yeah, basically the lift engine approach was abandoned in 1967, basically. After the success of the Su-17 around the same time, having the variable geometric wing, they decided to investigate further if they could make a better. I mean, the Su-17 was basically a half measure, with the short takeoff kind of thing, with the Su-17 and the having a full like swing wing aircraft. So because of the wing pylons and stuff like that, especially because they had, obviously like the Americans, they had problems with the pylons, because if the whole wing was to just turn, was just to sweep and or not, the hard points would need to move parallel to the aircraft, and that was a problem that in the early 60s that made the Su-17 have this half measure, to still have a shorter takeoff than the Su-7, but still having a greater payload, not needing a new system just to make the pylons be parallel to the fuselage, And with that out of the mind, with better systems being done and stuff like that, basically means that they decided to do more investigation and basically go for that approach. Instead of using 4 engines for lift, they would just make it so that the pylons would be parallel to the aircraft and make the whole wing, or almost like 90%, 95% of the wing sweepable. So it's just the more advanced designs that were being done in the basically late 60s. So yeah, but basically they decided it was a better idea than the lift engines, right? So yeah, even though the lift engines provided for a shorter takeoff than the delta wing, I mean, it was just not a very good design overall, and resulting in the T5 2i prototype, which first flew in 1970. So this idea behind with the full swept wing. The whole aircraft itself was the same, just the wing was different, with Ilyushin again, the commander Vladimir Ilyushin and the commands again. And the trials lasted until 1974, with the production starting slowly and stuff like that. 1 year after this first flight, the production was already at basically full pace, so yeah. With the day and night capabilities achieved successfully, thanks to the Puma system, consisted with 2 Orion A superimposed radar scanners and a dedicated terrain clearance radar, providing basically automatic controls for low altitude flying. Just basically the hands-off low altitude flying that the F-111 and the Tornadoes had as well. And basically, because the Su-24 had the same idea behind those aircraft as well, you know. It had, instead of the F-111, for example, they had a whole escape capsule. It had this Vesda K-36D ejection seat, allowing the aircraft, the pilots to eject at low altitudes and at takeoffs and landing too, and anything, basically every single part of the flight, bailing out at any altitude and any speed, which was kind of a thing back in the day, you know. The design managed a range of around 3,000 kilometers, so pretty good range, and a payload of 8,000 kilograms. The first production models flew in 1971 with Commander Vilumov at the controls, and on 1975 it was fully accepted into service as the Su-24 with around 1,400 built. So they built a lot of these things. Many upgrades were made along the years, obviously, along the 80s and stuff, and even until this day. So along the years, obviously, addition of more modern systems, more modern sensors, more modern weaponry, GLONASS systems even, which is the GPS of the Russians, MFD systems, modern HUDs, digital map generators, helmet-mounted displays, later missiles like the R-73. But we are going to talk a bit about the variants later in the video, okay, as always. It's being used, and it was used by many nations, including Algeria, Belarus, Iran, Libya, Russia, Syria, Sudan, Ukraine, and some of the former operators were Azerbaijan, Iraq, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and of course the Soviet Union. Used in many wars too. In the Soviet-Afghan War, it was started between 1984 and 1988. It had limited service there, but it was used with no Su-24s lost there. In the Lebanese Civil War and the Chechen Wars and many other wars, it was used even in the Iraq, the Gulf War, you know, in 1990. I think it was 1990 or 2003, I don't remember. But yeah, the Russo-Georgian War in 2008, and in Syria in 2013, and Donbass since 2014, obviously until this day, because it's kind of a continuation war. Obviously, it started in 2014, kind of a civil war, and it's being fought right now until this day with the Russian military and Ukrainian military as well. Not gonna get too much into that, obviously, but yeah, it's being used right now. It's a very capable aircraft, and very beautiful, by the way, as well. Talking about how beautiful it is, let's talk about its performance and design. So yeah, the Su-24 has a shoulder-mounted variable geometry wing, so very similar to the F-111 in that sense, with a small fixed wing glove, so just a tiny bit of it is fixed, and the whole else of the wing is swept, you know. The max angle is 69, being swept that much, and the lower position is forward is 16 degrees, providing excellent short takeoff capabilities with a landing speeds of around 230 kilometers per hour, even lowered to the Su-17. So pretty good. The engines are the Lucas AL-21s, also named the Saturn AL-21. It is the F3A variant initially. It is an afterburning turbojet engine, so no turbofans. But still, for power itself, turbojets are normally a little bit better. For fuel efficient, the turbofans are a little bit better, but it depends, because you always have afterburning engines in these military aircraft, so yeah, it's not that simple, but still, each engine to each aircraft, I mean. It had around 109 kilonewtons of thrust each engine, so very strong. The max speed initially was 2,320 kilometers per hour, or Mach 2.18 at altitude, with a maximum or a service ceiling altitude of 17,500 meters. But since the Su-24 was designed for low altitude flight, more modern models were changed. The intakes were changed and other things to make it more simple and more and easier to maintain, and lower the cost a little bit, because the aircraft basically doesn't need to fly that high, you know, so, and that fast. So basically, in more modern aircraft, you will see numbers like a Mach 1.35 and a max service ceiling of around 11,000 meters. But it's not that the aircraft cannot go faster than that. It's just that it basically never goes that high and that fast. You know, it doesn't need to because it's always flying low. So yeah, the differences between the more modern and the more modern aircraft and the older ones are basically the same in the sense of a low altitude performance. So yeah, so basically it is a very good modification for the aircraft because it's supposed to be flying at lower altitudes. Changes were made during the production of the normal model, but it didn't receive a code name in the Soviet service. So you will see some Fencer B or something like that, but it doesn't actually have a name. So yeah, like the rear fuselage was improved for less drag, repositioning of the braking chute, an ram air inlet in the tail fin for the engines, and some other modifications were made during the production of the initial model as well. Okay, but they don't have a proper name. The armament, especially the gun, was a single GSH 623 gun, which is obviously, if you know, the GSH means that it is built in the Grishaev Shipunov Bureau. 6 means that it has 6 barrels, and 23 is the caliber, so 23 millimeters. So it's a 6-barreled 23 millimeter Gatling gun made by Grishaev Shipunov with 500 rounds. You know, very good gun. Used also in the MiG-31 and also in some of the Su-15s. It has a rate of fire of 8,000 rounds a second, the normal, but it could allegedly go to 10,000 rounds a second. But normally in game we will probably see 8,000, pretty good. Muzzle velocity being 750 meters per second, and it has, when it's not used, it has an eyelid that is basically shuts that gun. I think it is not automatic. You have to just do that on the ground, but still. And for air-to-air, it has 2 to 4 R-60s missiles, you know, and with later models, obviously using the R-73. So we can use 4 R-60s and obviously the R-60M, because the R-60M entered in service in 1977. So it's around the middle between, I mean, it was before the Su-24M, which is the later Soviet model, so they were going to talk about, but still. And obviously it can carry earlier than the R-60 because it entered service earlier than the normal R-60 entered in service. So it could carry the R-55, which is a very cool missile, similar to an A9D or A9G, you know, something like that in turning capabilities and range. So yeah, initial Su-24s used the SPO-10 Sirena, so it's basically the same RWR as in the MiG-21 and initial MiG-23s, and it had no jamming systems. But later they were upgraded to have the Berioza and have more modern RWR systems even to this day, and missile launch systems and rear radars and active ECMs and stuff like that as well. Okay, so yeah, we have plenty of versions to pick up from to get into War Thunder. Other armaments, the normal fuselage armaments would be basically all the types of rockets and bombs that the Russians have. So the S5, S8, S13, S24, S25, the 100, 500, 250 from the 1962 model, which is the 5500 M62, so pretty good. And later models even used the CAB 500s, the L and the KR, even the satellite-guided CAB 500S and anti-runaway ammunition. Also used anti-radiation missiles like the KH-28, 58, 25 MP, KH-31, KH-27 PS, anti-ships missiles like the KH-31A, and also being used with many laser-guided ammunition and TV-guided ammunition as well, like the KH-25, KH-29L and T, and even earlier than that, the KH-23M, when before the KH-29s and stuff like that were entered in service, you know. So even cruise missiles this thing can have. So yeah, it's pretty, basically can do any mission beyond just not the BVR mission. Basically that's it, you know. And since the Syrian civil war, it was used with the SVP-24 system, which basically means that it is a very modern CCRP system that basically calculates where the impact point will be. and the release point will needs to be using satellite information, air pressure, temperature, wind information, many other informations, and the aircraft just uses that to just calculate where the rocket or the bomb will be dropped, the dumb bombs and dumb rockets, and it's technically, theoretically, as precise as a guided bomb or a guided rocket, but without having a guidance. So I don't know how much of that is true, but still, it is what the SVP-24 systems try to do. Okay, so basically this is the aircraft. You know, low flying, very high speed, and it can do basically anything air to ground, and some air to air as well. It can defend itself. It's going to be fast. Not gonna turn too much, obviously, but it will be alright. It still has the swing wing that helps a little bit in the raid fights of sorts, but it's not a dogfighter. Okay. So yeah, the two last parts of the videos, obviously the variants and the variants that should come to War Thunder. So first the variants. So we have the normal SU-24. So this would be the initial variant that we see. Initial first production variant. The missiles would be just the KH-23 and the KH-28 as anti-radiation if it's ever added to War Thunder, for example. And until the R-60 entered in service, he used the R-60, the R-55 and a missile that I told you about, similar to the A9D and G. After the R-60 entered in service, used the R-60, and after the R-60M, used the R-60M. You know, once the R-73 entered in service, you already went for the Su-24M that we're going to talk about. It has basically non-guided bombs and rockets. It has still a great radar. I cannot confirm what are the capabilities of this radar, but I mean, obviously it's terrain avoidance at least, but I think it can detect targets as well. You know. I'm going to make a video on that probably next week about ground radars, so make sure to see that as well, okay? It was built between 1971 and 1983. It made a very capable aircraft, but it didn't have too much, not too many, you know, missiles and stuff like that. But then we have the Su-24M. In 1971, they already were thinking of an upgraded version of the Su-24. Especially with an expansion of attack capabilities of the aircraft and an addition of an in-flight refueling system, or IFR. In 1977, the Su-24M prototype first flew, and in 1979, the first production model flew. It was fully accepted into service in 1983, so it is basically a late 70s, early 80s aircraft. It had a longer fuselage with a retractable refueling probe that I told you about, a reshaped and a shorter radome, a new INS nav system, and a basically fully digital computer that could process everything. So it was, I think, it was the first aircraft, Soviet aircraft that had that. And the addition of the Kaira, the good old Kaira 24 laser designator system, which is basically the same system that we have in the MiG-27K. I couldn't confirm if it's the exact system or if it's a more modern version, but I would say that it's very similar to it at least. So it's basically the camera system that we have in the MiG-27K, okay? This is the Kaira. Basically was added under the fuselage, you know, so it's not on the nose, it's under the fuselage. And the TEONC, or TEOCN, I don't know, track and search system in a pod as well for some guided weaponry like the anti-radiation and basically anti-ship missiles. I think it was used for more for that, but still. It could be used, this Kaira system could be used to guide TV and laser guided bombs and missiles and stuff like that. So it was capable of using the CAB 500, CAB 500L and KR, the KH-25 that we already know and love, the KH-29T and the KH-29L, and it had even better anti-radiation missiles like the KH-58 and some versions of the KH-25 as well for anti-radiation, and even a KH-59 TV guided cruise missile, a very basically a longer range KH-25, very heavily modified, but very cool nonetheless. Having less fuel than the normal Su-24 as well, due to the new systems integrated to the aircraft. So we had 85 liters less, and it was produced between 1981 and 1993. This is the main variant of the Su-24. I think this is the most fun one that we can have. You will have the R60Ms, and with an upgrade can use the R73s if needed. It has all sorts of laser guided stuff and all sorts of TV guided stuff. As I said, it has the the Kaira system, which is a TV guided TV system, you know, for guidance, and a laser designator. So pretty amazing. This is the main variant that we are going to see probably in War Thunder, you know. Then we have a modernization of these, which is the SU-24M2, introduced in 2000, and it's equipped basically with more modern systems and equipments, so it's basically more efficient in combat. Includes the SVP-24 that I told you about before, first used in Syria. New weapons control systems, new HUD, a better, obviously the new HUD because even the SVP, a better system, a better and expanding list of ammunition, so including better anti-ship missiles such as the KH-31, the anti-radiation version of the KH-31 as well, the KH-59 MKs, the CAB 500S, for example, which is a CAB 500 that is guided by the GLONASS system. So basically, what's it called? A JDAN, I think it's called, yeah. And the last batch was delivered in 2009 for the VVS. And all of them received the SVP-24 that I told you about before in 2013 with an upgraded HUD for that system. So this is just an upgraded model. I think in-game could be an upgrade to the normal M. And I couldn't say that all of them were just upgraded or if there were new aircraft, probably a mix between that, but still. Then we have the three other different versions that we have, very fun ones. So the first one is the Su-24MK, which is the next port version of the Su-24M, with downgraded avionics and weapon systems, obviously. And it first flew in 1987 and manufactured between 1988 and 1992. Sold to Algeria, Syria, Iraq, and Libya. So pretty cool model. Then we have the Su-24MR, which is basically a dedicated tactical reconnaissance variant. So it's not only for bombing, it's more for, not only, it's kind of a wrong word to say, but it's more a dedicated reconnaissance aircraft than anything else. So the first flight was in 1980. So basically we have the Su-24M, MR, and the MP that were basically entered in service in the same year or around the same era. So yeah, so basically yeah. First flight in 1980 and entered in service in 1983, just like the Su-24M, you know, the MR. So yeah, it was very similar in many aspects to the Su-24M, but it has basically the same nav systems and terrain following radar and stuff like that. So instead of the Orion attack radar and the Kaira system and the cannon, all of that was deleted in favor for two panoramic camera installations, the AIST-M TV camera, the RDS-BO stick side-looking airborne radar, and the Zima infrared reconnaissance system. So I think he had thermals, but it's more of a dedicated reconnaissance variant, so it might not use too much bombs and stuff like that. I don't know. It may be used. I couldn't find information, but it probably can. It's just that they normally wouldn't use it. So it is one of the best variants, but it doesn't have the radar. It's just a more reconnaissance focused variant, you know. Other systems could be carried as a pod as well for anti-radiation and other stuff. So yeah, made from 1983 to 1993, and it is also being modernized right now. It's being used right now. Very, very cool version. The last version, the Su-24MP, a dedicated electronic signal intelligence, or ELINT version. So basically, it is a more of a SEAD kind of focused version, you know. It's not basically that, not only that, it does everything that a SEAD aircraft will do, but it can do intelligence, electronic intelligence as well, which is a very like a very important thing to do in modern combat. So that's a very, very cool thing. It was to be replaced was to replace the old Yak-28 PP. First flight in 1980 as well, and introduction in 1983 as well. Additional antennas for intel gathering sensors, radar jamming, and basically omitting basically just intelligence, electronic intelligence, and seed, you know. The Kaira system was removed, but it still had the cannon, and it could use up to 4 R60s as well. Only 10 of them were built, but a very, very interesting and very cool version as well. Okay, so these are the variants, not many of them, just 6, but very, very cool ones nonetheless. And then the variants that should come to War Thunder, in my opinion. Let me focus on that, my opinion, okay? But yeah, the right thing to do on an aircraft like this would be to put first the MiG-27s under the Su-25s as attackers, and the Su-7 until the Su-17M4 under the bomber line, and then the Su-24 could come under that. But since we don't have that, I even made a video about that, the complete um, rework on the Soviet 3 that I proposed. But beyond that, because we don't have that yet, we kind of have to just ignore that. So yeah, the Su-17, the Su-24 can come below the two aircraft. I mean, it could come below the Su-17M4 or the MiG-27K. I think under the Su-17M4 would be kind of more fitting, even though the Su-17M4 could do CAS. Many aircraft can, and the Su-17 was basically kind of a frontline bomber more than the MiG-27 was. So I think it would just make sense because of that, and being a Sukhoi, it would just make sense to be under the Su-17 no matter where it is, you know. So under the Su-17M4, I would say that we need to put the Su-24, the normal variant, the initial, just like the F-111A should be added, and the IDS GR-1 Tornado should be added as well, with the normal bombs, dumb bombs and stuff like that, with the anti-radiation missiles added in the future, if added at all, and only having the KH-23M guided missile for air-to-ground, and to be honest, initially the R-55 missile, and then the R-60 missile, and then depending on the BR, the R-60M missile. Still has a lot of flares and stuff like that. I couldn't find how many exactly, but it has a lot of flares and stuff like that, so not worry about that. And yeah. Then after that, the Su-24M, I think it would be just fitting, you know, having all the TV guided stuff, the laser guided stuff being the top of the line, kinda the top of the line dog, you know. So of the bomber line, you know, it would be probably one of the last modern bombers that we will see. So yeah, that would be the last of the last, you know. So having all the types of Kaira systems, TV systems, you know, TV guided bombs and rockets, missiles guided by laser, guided by many, many things. And even in the far future, we can see the M2 upgrade being an upgrade for the as a modification for the M, having a new HUD and maybe new missiles and stuff like that, having especially the GLONASS CAB 500S bomb or stuff like that if the JDEN is added. So yeah, it can be upgraded as a modification. I think, you know, it would be fitting. So these would be the two variants from the line. I think it would be fitting to just have these two, Su-24 and then the Su-24M, with maybe in the far future with the M2 being an upgrade. And basically three maybes that we can see. One of the maybes would be a premium or event vehicle. They can be added as the Su-24 MK from Syria. We already have some vehicles from Syria, so a Su-24M, but just less capable, as a premium or an event vehicle would be very, very cool to have, with less weaponry and stuff like that. And maybe a 2.0, and a big if, like if SEED is added to War Thunder, if anti-radiation aircraft is added to War Thunder, we can have the MP variant, you know, that can do SEED and jamming and stuff like that, and ECM and stuff. So I don't know, but normal ones can do ECM and SEED. So maybe not even if SEED is added, we need this variant, but it would be very cool because it's one of the coolest variants ever. And yeah, the MR would be also the last maybe, but that's just kind of a personal opinion, because the MR, it's a very, very fun, and I think it's very, very different from the normal Su-24. So maybe in the far future we can see a version like that. I think it's one of the coolest ones because it is a tactical reconnaissance variant, but it can do attacks again, still, you know. And I think it had thermals. I could not confirm. I mean, it has an infrared sensor, but I could not confirm if this Zima was actually a camera system or some other type of infrared reconnaissance system, you know. But if you do, it would be nice to have that, you know, have a thermal. And but, I mean, you would not have the Kaira system to designate the target, but you would have basically a thermal to just look for the targets. So that could be a very cool. I just think that the MR is such a cool variant that maybe in the far future we can see it, but probably not. Um, Getting back to track, you know, the normal variants probably will be just the SU-24 and the SU-24M, and maybe big if the SU-24MP, and but more likely the SU-24MK being the premium or event vehicle if it's added at all. So basically this is it, guys. One of my favorite aircraft ever. I mean, the Su-24 is just such an iconic aircraft, and it represents the modernization of the Soviet Air Force in the 70s, you know, and the 80s. And it is just the way that the Soviets had to do very cool bombers and still be effective, you know. So it is a very cool bomber. I think this was a very long video, but it is a video that I wanted to do for a long time because I really love this aircraft. So I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to subscribe, make sure to be a member. It helps a lot. These videos are hard to make sometimes, so make sure to be a member if you want to help a little bit more on the channel. But if you already subscribe and watch everything, it is already plenty. So thank you guys, and I see you guys on the next one. Bye guys, see you.